Hello everyone, this is POW Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be talking about an Arctic blast, snowstorm, and numerous storm systems over the next 7 to 10 days. So if you're new to the channel, click the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to it. This is Sunday, October 3rd, and I really expanded the view this morning to the Northern Hemisphere version. You can get a really true depiction on what's really happening with the weather. As you can see out here in the open waters of the Atlantic, there's sand that we're still dealing with as a hurricane. That's going to be moving safely offshore into the open waters. We've got some instability developing down here in the Bahamas. The National Hurricane Center is looking at possibly some sort of tropical activity developing over the coming week. We also have a trough that's digging into the western part of the U.S., pumping in some cooler conditions for them, and then it will really get cold as we extend throughout the week. So this morning, all that cold air is bottled up in Alaska, and they had a lot of heavy snow. These are the real-time temperatures for this morning, and the entire state is below freezing with all that snow cover they had yesterday. You can see the colder conditions are trying to filter down into the western part of the U.S., and they're going to be taking shape as a step down effect. Will take shape throughout the week and then bring some very cold conditions and definitely the coldest air of the season into the western U.S. As we take a look going on through Wednesday, October the 6th, there's that trough still digging in down from Alaska. That's going to be entering the Pacific Northwest with that colder conditions pumping in out on the west coast. And there's another developing trough out here into the southeast. So we've got a lot of instability happening in the tropics. Then we also have a developing storm system off the southeast. That's going to bring some very heavy rain as the ridge builds over the top in the northern U.S. As we extend into October the 9th timeframe, again, there's that trough still digging in into the western parts of the U.S. We all that have that instability down here in the Caribbean, into the Florida, into the southeast. But we got some very cold air pumping out behind this system, because by the time we get into that October 12th time frame, man, this air is going to be really cold, and you're going to be feeling it in a big way with the coldest air of the season locked and loaded over the western part of the U.S., while we've got instability underneath with all that heavier rain and probably some sort of tropical entity by then. But you're going to be dealing with numerous storm systems down here in the southeast as well as into Florida throughout much of the week. So let's take a look at the picture today. So because today we had that cold front that dumped all the heavier rain into parts of the desert southwest, into New Mexico and much of Texas over the last 4 to 5 days. There's that cold front. Back behind it, we've got a much clearer, drier air mass back behind the cold front. Out ahead of it, we still have to have that instability with some scattered showers and thunderstorms. Fortunately, there's nothing severe on the map for today for the U.S., but you're still going to be dealing with those scattered showers and thunderstorms throughout much of the southeast and the Ohio Valley, into the northeast as well, ahead of that cold front ahead of the warm sector. As you extend the view into your Monday, October the 4th here, there's that cold front will continue to shift further off into the east. Now it puts all the instability off into the southeast, into the mid-Atlantic, and into the northeast. And again, high and dry back behind it. We could see some subtle isolated showers forming, yes, in parts of Southern California. So that is definitely welcomed. And again, parts of Arizona, where they actually had their second wettest monsoon season on record, and more rain continues for that area of the country. So it's been predominantly wet over the last several months. As we extend the view to Tuesday, that's where things start to get interesting, because we've got that developing trough that's going to be over the southeast. That's going to bring our first storm system off into the southeast and bring some very heavy rain, if not stormy conditions, into parts of Alabama, into Georgia, into the southern South Carolina, into North Carolina. Back behind it, we have multiple rounds of troughs coming in off the west coast And underneath that, it's going to be cold enough to snow into the higher elevations, into Colorado, into Wyoming, as well as parts of Washington, where you're going to be taking advantage of those fall-like temperatures, if not cooler conditions, and some rain showers moving back into Washington and Oregon and parts of Northern California on the day on Tuesday. So as we extend into the tropics, there's that developing system that the National Hurricane Center has highlighted as a 20% chance of development over the course of the next 5 days. So there's a lot of instability that's going to be starting to develop into the Caribbean. So we're really going to be having to watch this area. I highlighted it the other day as we get into that Tuesday timeframe. There's a lot of tropical moisture going to be developing into the Caribbean, and that's when it's going to spread all those heavier rains into Jamaica, into the Cayman Islands. And as we get into the middle of next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday timeframe, this slug of moisture will dump all those heavier rains in the Caribbean, will eventually start feeding into parts of Florida, as well as the Southeast as we get deeper into next week. So as we extend the view on the vertical velocity chart here on October the 6th, you can definitely see underneath that, that's where you're going to have all that heavier rains and possibly some severe weather setting up by then. By the time we get to Wednesday, under the Southeast, there's that spokes and spokes of energy with troughs digging in off the West Coast. We got one round here, and then we have another second round. So this is definitely much different. Some big changes on the way for much of the West, where you've been high and dry and warm for much of the summer. It's going to be completely the opposite over the next week or two, or if not couple of weeks, with some very cold air masses coming in your parts and some rain, some definitely welcome rain in those areas. So we got a lot to talk about as we get into that October the 8th time frame. That's when it really starts to crank up, and with the cooler weather, we've got that vorticity. I mean, how often have you seen this in the last couple of months, digging down into California, spreading some welcome rains into those areas, and not just rains, but we got much cooler conditions. And yet we have another developing system over here in Alaska. That's the one with that really cold air mass going to be filtering in as we get into next week and beyond. Because let's look at the teleconnections, and this really tells the story of what's happening. I put here's the PNA, which is your Pacific North American. Basically, when this is positive on the western coast, you're primarily warmer conditions. When it's negative, you might have much cooler conditions. And the further negative it goes, it's basically brings down more colder air. So as we get into that, this is October 3rd, so it's already negative, right? But as we get deeper into this week, by the time we get into that October 9th, and especially that October 10th time frame, look how far negative it goes. Not just a -3, -4, -5 deviation. That's some very cold air going to be pumping into the western parts of the U.S. at the same time. The EPO, which is your Eastern Pacific Oscillation, which primarily filters into the central and eastern 2/3 of the United States. When it's positive, again, it's much warmer conditions. When it's negative, it's much cooler conditions. It tries to go negative, but primarily it's well positive. You got all the warmer air basically on the central and eastern 2/3, with all the very cold air on the western part of the U.S. And that's going to be highlighted and definitely impacted as we go throughout the week, and especially as we get into that 10th, 11th, and 12th time frame. That's when you really start bottoming out with some that coldest air of the season, and you're going to be definitely feeling it in a big way. There, and the Climate Prediction Center has already highlighted this with that well below average temperatures pumping into the western parts of the U.S. with that above average precipitation for the Pacific Northwest and California. This is definitely a welcome sight for much of the West Coast and the central part as we dry out underneath. But there's the ridge locked and loaded over the central and 2/3 of the United States, with some very warmer conditions, well above average warmer conditions by the time we get into that 8th and 12th time frame. But underneath that, there's the anomalies by the time that we get in the 8th. So you can definitely see the PNA goes well negative, and that's depicted on some very cold air entering picture. So how often have you seen lately of 25 upwards to 30 degrees below average temperatures in California and in Nevada and to parts of Washington and Oregon here and to Idaho and Utah and Nevada in Arizona? So this is definitely some welcome air, but it's completely opposite as you get into the central and 2/3 of the U.S. with those well above average temperature anomalies of 25 to 20, 30 degrees above average for them. So it's going to be a complete, difference in weather of 50 to 60 degree swing, depending on if you live on the West Coast or the East Coast with these temperature anomalies. Because by the time we get into the October 10th timeframe, that's when it really starts to get interesting. We've got all that instability down here into the south and the southeast with all those heavier rains going to be moving in. We got spokes and spokes of energies with these multiple vorticities and the mid-levels sending energies and impulses of colder air, and underneath that some rain showers. But we got that second surge of colder air by then with that PNA going well negative, and that's going to bring the coldest conditions of the season, and you're going to feel it in a big way. Underneath that, those well below average temperature anomalies continue to take shape as we get into that Tuesday, October 12th time frame, with those well below average temperatures continue to take hold into the western part, and those well above average temperatures over the eastern, central, and eastern 2/3 of the U.S. And underneath that, you can imagine it's going to be cold enough to snow, and if not a snowstorm by then into Idaho and Montana. So we could be picking up some heavy snows and into parts of Montana and getting into Wyoming by the time we get into that time frame with that coldest air mass of the season. And man, by October 3rd, I mean, look at the clash in temperatures as this cold air will continue to shift further off into the central part of the U.S. And I think that's when we could be dealing with some major severe weather outbreaks again. And as we get into the central part and get into the southeast, by the time we get deeper into this week, with this just clash in temperatures that's going to be taking shape by the time we get into the October 13th and the middle of the month time frame. So it could be really active by then. So, but underneath that, for the next 7 to 10 days, there's all your rain prospects. With that rain, with those consecutive troughs, it's going to be digging in under much of the West Coast. That's going to bring some welcome rain from much of the West. And underneath that, it's going to be cold enough to snow. There it is, drying out in Texas. You had all that heavier rains in Oklahoma and Texas, and it's going to be drying out for the next 7 to 10 days with all the instability off to the southeast and off of the southeast coast, with those heavier rains setting up into Alabama and to Georgia and into South Carolina and to North Carolina, as well as Virginia and West Virginia, as we always look for the tropics, because you got all that heavier rains underneath in the Caribbean and Jamaica and the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. So we're going to have to be watching for some sort of tropical storm development down here as well. With up to the north, we have those systems that coming across. Even though you may be well above average temperatures, you're still going to be having to deal with those heavier rains into parts of the Dakotas, into Minnesota, into Wisconsin, into Michigan as well. And those heavier rains will just continue off the East Coast into the Mid-Atlantic states as well. And there's your snow underneath that colder air, with snowstorms happening in Idaho and Montana and Wyoming and filtering down into Colorado over the next 7 to 10 days. So yes, snow is coming back into the picture underneath that colder air and the coldest air of the season. So I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video and definitely leave your comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update where I protect you before and after the storm.